digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined once again by Brian from Team Rock. We also have with us Phil from Jagex, and we have with us the duo of Jeff and Paul from Legion M. Welcome to the show, guys.
We're pleased to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And I wonder if, for the benefit of our listeners, you could explain a little bit more about what you do. And I'm going to start with you, Brian, because the last time you was on the show, you hadn't quite joined Team Rock just yet.
Yes, so I wear a whole bunch of different hats, but at the moment I'm the day job is executive producer for Team Rock, which is a new Scottish startup. We come from an old media background. We publish magazines, we run radio stations, all focused on rock and metal. But my role here is to start the new games division and start finding new ways to bring music and interactive entertainment a little more close together.
Okay, and also on the sideline, your little day side job on BAFTA Scotland, maybe worth mention?
Yeah, I run the Scottish Games Network, which is the trade association for the games industry in Scotland. I sit on the BAFTA Scotland committee. I guest lecture at Screen Academy at Napier University. There's a whole bunch of stuff. You know, it's either this or I sit and get fat. So I like to keep busy.
Thank you, Brian. And Phil, why don't you explain to us exactly what your role is over at Jagex?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Phil Mansell. I'm the Vice President of Game Studios at Jagex. That means I'm in charge of the games, really. Our flagship game is called RuneScape. It's a really big online role-playing game. We've been expanding it over the last few years, both the main RuneScape game, and we're adding a range of other games to its family. As a company and me as an individual, we focus on running games as a service. So more than just the game product itself, but creating communities and content and this whole extra sort of service layer around the game experience itself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Phil. And Jeff, why don't you explain to us about what you do at Legion M?
This is Jeff Annison, and I'm the president of Legion M, and we're building, Paul and I, we're the two co-founders, and we are building the world's first fan-owned entertainment company. And so we're making use of brand new equity crowdfunding laws. They're new to the United States. I know that they may not be new over there, but to build a entertainment company that is truly owned by the fans.
Wonderful. And Paul, do you have anything to add to that description of your business, or do you want to expand out on what you do within the business?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Paul Scanlon. I'm CEO and co-founder with Jeff. And the one thing that I would add is with Legion M, we get not only does our funding come from the fans, but that's also the source of our power. So as we get behind projects, movies and TV shows, and we're partnering with some of Hollywood's top tier content creators, as we get behind those projects, we're not only bringing funding to those projects to help make them happen and to bring them to market, but as we do that, we're bringing the fans along with it, so that when we introduce a new movie or TV show or something to the market, we have what we call our legion of fans that are financially invested in the content, but also emotionally invested because they've been there from day one when we first, bought the script or worked with the creator to develop the content and bring it to market.
So that begs the question: what does the M stand for?
The M is an M with a bar over it, and it's our aspirational goal of 1 million fans. So we want to build a legion of 1 million. So M with the bar is a Roman symbol for a million. And we're well on our way.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for joining us. The conversation that we're going to have today stems from a conversation actually that has been had several times on this show now, talking about the future of entertainment in terms of the next generation of content consumers, but also content creators, and this idea of collaboration with the audience and collaboration with the community and the fandom around a particular property. And I'm going to start with you, Phil, because I think that you probably have something quite interesting to contribute, in as much as with the RuneScape audience. I know there is a very long history, over a decade's worth of history here, in terms of fandom and collaboration with the community. that helps to steer sometimes the direction that you would develop the content and the choices that you might make in terms of new areas that you might want to expand into, or even new platforms that you might want to expand into, such as the novels that have been printed. And I'm curious from your perspective how much influence you feel that the community has had in this development of the IP.
That's a great question. I think RuneScape, more than most games, and kind of more than most I can think of, has been incredibly shaped by the players over the years in lots of different ways. I mean, when the company started, well before my time here, it was driven in a really indie way where the people working on the game would be playing alongside regular players, talking with them in game, on the forums, that kind of thing, and getting a very kind of friendly and informal back and forth about what people liked and how to evolve it and how to change it. I think as time's gone on and the user base has scaled up massively, we've needed to find more ways to formalize those channels, but also keep that personal touch. So one thing we've done in the last few years is make sure that pretty much all of our staff, our developers, are on Twitter, and they're encouraged to really engage with the players, talking about ideas, swapping anecdotes and stories, and whether it's things like polls or other kind of ways to engage with players. I mean, that's the really basic level. We try and take it to several more than that. We really support a lot of our community channels on Reddit, and we have forums and that kind of thing. But where I think it's special, and we do more than most people, is we've actually created formal tech solutions for getting players' ideas and desires into the game. So we created a portal on our website called Player Power. So it allowed players to vote on potential upcoming content, and we did it every month. And about half of the gameplay and features and stuff we put into the game were decided by the players, and that went really well, and it helped build up really a lot of engagement and trust between Jagex and the RuneScape community. Then a couple of years ago, we took that to even the next level, and we created a system called Rune Labs, where players could submit their ideas for content in the game, different quests they wanted, characters they wanted brought back, really anything they could think of. And then other players would comment and vote on those, and the top voted ideas would actually be made by us. So we went from the players deciding informally how the game was shaped, then we created formal structures for that, and then we actually allowed them to really do a lot of the designs themselves. And that's harder for us, but it also means they're super engaged, and is like a democratization of the content, I think. That's been really good for us.
I'm interested, Brian, to hear from your perspective on this, because the question I would ask, following on from what Phil is saying, which is when you engage the community to help to ideate around possible new content and new directions for the IP, there becomes this really interesting grey space where there's going to be certain aspects of this audience who they're going to, be very, very involved. They're going to have a stake in the ground, and they're going to say, actually, I own this content. This is my creation. I helped to shape this. Versus the fact that this IP belongs to the studio in question. And so where does that line get drawn when it comes to the use of an audience to create what we might refer to as UGC, or user-generated content, or to help steer an IP? At what point does it become something that can viably be passed along in terms of that Creative Commons license, or that idea that somebody else has created the content? And at what point does it become exploitative of the audience and the fan base to help steer and create this IP?
That's a fantastically complex question. And I think it comes down to there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It goes very much project by project. And one of the key critical issues here for developers and publishers is if they are going to be making use of user-generated content, and if they want to, get their fan base involved. And I think, everyone here is going to agree that that can be fantastically useful and can involve people and engage people over the course of years and, possibly decades, because we're still reasonably early into this, is that the company in question essentially has to be sure of how they want to engage and the limitations of where they're comfortable with users getting involved. And then you actually have to build an infrastructure around that, so it's kind of clear from the outset where the users can get involved, and then beyond which, I'm really sorry guys, but this is not okay. Because if you look at, there are so many different examples out there from open source software where people contribute their time and experience and expertise to something as simple as, say, Little Big Planet, where users can use specifically created tools to create their own content. So it really does come down to individual projects. And for something like RuneScape, that is a community-driven game, and getting those players involved makes so much sense that, Jagex have done a fantastic job over the years doing all of this. But the reality these days for any game developer, any content creator out there is, if you're doing your job well and people are passionate about your product, your content, or your service, as we must now think of it, you need to be willing to take that on, and you're going to have the capabilities of taking their ideas and utilizing them. Because if they're getting involved and shouting and asking for things, and you either say no, or you're not interested, or you just ignore them, all that enthusiasm and passion is going to turn against you very quickly. And similarly, if people feel like they're being exploited, and you're basically asking them for free labor, again, it can turn quite ugly. Because as we all know, gamers can be quite picky when it comes to this.
Lovingly vocal is what I'm going to say.
Yes, that's probably the best way of saying it. But I think more and more developers are going to have to plan from the outset, if this works and if we get the kind of fan base that we want, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to allow them to sort of get involved? And you are going to have some sort of agreement or legal framework in place to say, look, guys, you're not going to be able to turn around in 5 years and go, well, you've made so much money and now I want a share, because down that route trouble lies. So I think it's just forward planning is always better than hindsight.
So I'm interested then in the context of this new empire that you're creating with Legion M, the structure that you're going with, it sounds awfully similar to projects like Conman, for example, where we've seen an extremely loyal fan base who went to the extreme of really pushing to have what was essentially a cancelled TV show after one season become a theatrical release. And whether or not the theatrical release was successful is almost beside the point, because the fans were successful in their objective, which was to get it to theatrical release in the first place. And so what you're doing really is containing that passion and the enthusiasm for what was originally the Serenity and Firefly universe, and applying it to this next generation of the entertainment, which is actually the Conman series, which was developed by some of the actors who were in the piece. And the transference of that passion, the transference of that loyalty to that particular project has been outstanding, to see just how much the fans were willing to support it and to follow that journey. And in fact, when we look at the Indiegogo campaign, that video that they launched for this piece did speak very strongly about this lack of trust for distributors, the lack of trust with somebody else taking this content and publishing it and distributing it, because actually they wanted to have a direct relationship with the community and with the fans. And I am curious from your perspective, Paul, what you see the communication, the relationship being with this Legion M audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it's great that you bring up some of the creative projects that we're actually very interested in, and having some dialogue there now. I mean, one of the key differences with Legion M, and like Jeff said, I mean, we're taking advantage of some new rules. So for the first time in history, instead of going out to the fans and asking them to either donate or do some rewards based, buy a t-shirt or a coffee mug or something like that to help us, bring back this creative project that you love, we're actually allowing the fans to own a piece of it and to own a piece of the studio and invest in that entity that can then bring this project back to life. And so, this is an area of very high focus for us, is looking at where there are strong fan bases and projects that may otherwise not fit within the traditional or what we say is kind of become an overly conservative model in the industry with the bigger studios, that would allow us to go out, activate that fan base, But instead, one of the key differences is that with Legion M, we're not pre-selling access to the content. And this is one of the things that's I think to a certain degree been limiting of Kickstarter and Indiegogo and some of the other tools that are out there, is that in order to create a successful new franchise or a new project, or bring back an existing franchise, you need to have the opportunity for monetization. And if you pre-sold access to it, there's a good example with Veronica Mars, where they were very successful in raising the money with the fans to produce the movie, but they did so by pre-selling the DVD. In our case, we would be allowing those fans to participate and own a piece of the studio that's creating this new content, but then we're all on the same side of the table to go out and monetize it. And this is where the rest of the industry will be more receptive, because if you're trying to get a theatrical release, for example, on a movie where you've already pre-sold the DVD to a vast majority of the fans, it's very challenging, because the theaters look at it and go, well, most of the fans already own it. And you're going to get, so, and as you know, the Hollywood industry is very, sensitive to these windows. And so, what we think is interesting about what we're doing is that, fans own a piece of the company, but, I can own shares in Apple, but I don't get Apple products for free. I own shares in Apple, and therefore I use Apple products, and I encourage my friends to use Apple products. And that's what we want to create for Legion M.
So I'm curious, and I'm going to throw this one at you, Jeff, which is that if you're dealing with essentially what you're referring to as a fan base, so ideally in a average world, somebody who isn't necessarily educated in the production process or the distribution process for content in general, how do you perceive this communication that is going to need to occur between you and this audience to ensure that there is transparency and an understanding as to just how much agency they actually have because they are an investor in Legion M, versus necessarily the kind of creative input they might want to have or the collaboration level they might want to have? Because when it comes to this kind of thing, crowdfunding or crowdsourcing, there is usually an expectation from the audience that they're going to have some kind of interaction, whether that is, if I put in $10,000, I'm going to get to turn up on set and, walk across the stage. That's great. But that means that I'm actually able to have an interaction, versus a Legion M investment, which doesn't necessarily involve anything that actually allows any tangibility to the relationship.
I would say a couple things. Our proposition to you or to anybody as a potential investor in Legion M is really what we call kind of like a holistic ROI. And it's a combination of two things. One is the financial ROI that you get as just like if you were to own a share of Walt Disney Pictures or something like that, right? If we are successful as a studio, if we're successful as a company, the value of the stock that you're buying for us will go up. However, unlike most other stocks that are out there, we also believe that we can provide an emotional ROI. And that's kind of the reward that you get, right? The reason why so many people back Kickstarter and Indiegogo projects. I mean, we absolutely love Kickstarter and Indiegogo. We think it's probably as an entrepreneur, one of the greatest innovations of the last 20 years. And so if you look at that, it really perplexes a lot of people on the financial side, because they're saying, why are people effectively donating money to these projects? But it's for those sorts of experiences that you're talking about. It's the ability to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself. And, we really want to provide that to our shareholders. And that's a critical part of how we select our projects and how you structure all this, is making sure that we can take you along for the ride, and so that we can take you backstage and live stream from the set, or do an online hangout with the director, or that sort of thing. And so So it's really important for us to provide that because we think that's a big part of the return that you get as an investor. If you put $100 into Legion M, we want to, we want to be able to turn that into more than $100. But even so, even if it just stays flat at $100, we want it to be an amazing experience for you. But the second part of that, as far as the agency of the fans, I think everybody understands that you don't make great art by committee. The things that Phil and Brian are talking about are fantastic examples of creators who have found effective ways to engage their community and to, give them the ability to vote on stuff or the ability to suggest stuff or an ability to be part of the process. But at the same time, you need to empower the creators, whether it's the game designers or in our case, the movie or television content creators, to create these experiences. That's what they do for a living. And so, we want to get you involved as much as possible, but we also don't want to give away the plot. And, we're very clear with people that, you are going to have a voice in this process, but it's not like you get to call the shots, right? You don't get to direct, you don't get to turn in your notes. We'll find ways where it's effective and constructive for the creators to come to you with questions or with ideas or that sort of thing.
Okay. So, Brian, I'm curious to understand from your perspective, when we talk about this kind of next generation of content consumers, there is certainly a different attitude towards the ownership of content and towards the creation of content. And I'm curious to understand from your perspective whether or not you think that this idea of collaboration with the content creator or agency, as we refer to it, is something that you think is going to kind of evolve over time, or whether or not you think that it is about kind of maintaining and protecting the integrity of the creator's vision.
Again, I think it comes down to individual projects, Tanya. In a lot of cases, the audience themselves, their expectations are changing and growing. You'll have heard from people in the music sector, you'll have heard from some of the big movie organisations that, not only is home taping killing music, but we use night vision goggles to make sure that nobody can record in cinemas. And that's kind of the general perception of intellectual property protection. But if you go back even to, Henry Jenkins and the whole cut-up culture and fair use culture, more and more people are now looking for ways to just, show their love for different types of content. And from fan fiction, you have authors out there like J.K. Rowling who basically says, go nuts, have fun, it's your world as well, guys. But, still my intellectual property and I'm getting the checks for the books. Thank you very much. But on the other hand, you have authors who say, no, absolutely not. This is my content and frankly, I don't want you messing with it. So it does come down to the creators themselves. But I think that has to be balanced with the fact that the expectations of the fans, of the audiences, and this does skew depending on the types of content that you have out there. So fan fiction is arguably one of the first. Did you know the Bronte sisters actually started writing fan fiction about the Duke of Wellington back in the period when they were just up and coming and aspiring authors. So it goes back an awful long time. But I think that we do have to understand that when it comes to digital media and it comes to an ever more tech savvy and online audience out there, then they're going to expect to be able to do things like, share clips, create memes out of things. And that's not necessarily harming the intellectual property. It can actually influence it. And the whole notion of user-generated content when it comes to the game sector is based around the fact that, there are so many people out there with so much time that they're going to be able to build things that, you as the developer or the publisher would just never come up with because, there's only so many people on a team. So it's a difficult one to sort of say, we do this, and this is the way forward, because you do have to balance the ability to earn a living for the content creators versus the expectations of the fans.
This is an interesting point in terms of the expectation of the fans. And I'm going to bring this one back to you, Phil, because I am very aware of the expectations that come with a game like RuneScape. And I'm curious from your perspective, obviously there have been some decisions about alternative ways to generate revenue and to generate income through a game like RuneScape. And not least one of the most interesting recent developments that you had, which was your esports event, which traditionally, when you think about, the fact that RuneScape is an MMORPG, it is not what one would necessarily consider suitable for an esports environment or an esports tournament. And yet you had quite a significant audience turn up and watch other people playing essentially a dungeon version of your game. And I'm curious from your perspective, when you look at these new alternative options of ways to create revenue streams, but also to enhance the relationship with the audience, what is it that's driving these kinds of decisions, these thoughts for you?
Well, our esports experiment was definitely on the side of enhancing the experience. I mean, we didn't charge for entry for it apart from the way that people normally pay for the game. It was really us trying to just try out some new ideas, really. I mean, when you've got a big online world, it doesn't have to be like RuneScape, there's a lot of other massively multiplayer games. People don't seem to generally think they can be used for competitive kind of experiences, but we wanted to challenge that, or at least just test some ideas. Like, most esports, like normal sports, have very small match periods. They have individuals or teams competing, very discreet, very easy to organize. But we're in the digital world now. We can reshape the playing field really any way we want. So we wanted to have a go at that. And when you've got a big online world, you can have thousands of people competing together, not just a handful or individuals. You can bring in economies and have people have trade warfare as well as actually hitting each other with weapons or whatever. Actually have people defending outposts or cities and engaging in arbitrage on markets. Is there a way, we thought, to distill that much wider experience of an online virtual world as opposed to a sports match? Can we blend those two somehow? We ended up with this way of having RuneScape as an esport where we speed the game up massively. We have everyone start from scratch, but we do have it run across the whole world. Hundreds of square miles worth. And of course, with a sport, you need an ending, you need a resolution. So we narrowed in the world in the last hour. If you died in the last hour, you were dead for good. We restricted and constricted the game world so people were in a tighter and tighter space, and it ended up with this brilliant finale of people being pushed together and fighting to be the last man standing. And there were problems and stuff we learned from it, but by having this longer form competition, it meant that fans could follow their favorite player for several days in the evenings as they were leveling up and getting ready. They could see this much broader palette of competitive experiences, and that's why we were highly ranked on Twitch during the tournament. We had tons of people both taking part and massive volumes of people watching. I think we might have found something quite cool. We've got a long way to go to explore where it can really go, but I think just by challenging the notion of what esports and online worlds should be and having a go at colliding them together, we found some quite cool outcomes.
I find it interesting that you're talking about the collision of different expectations, if you like, in different worlds. And from the perspective of Legion M, this is quite a step away from what people's expectations might be of this type of collaborative medium, if you like, and also in terms of collaborative funding. It's certainly a different methodology, a different approach. Do you see that there is going to be the scope for further exploration in the way that you're approaching this audience from an investment perspective, but also perhaps potentially further down the line from a concept perspective and an IP perspective, of having them perhaps come to you with perspective IPs? I know that you mentioned earlier you're looking at interesting IPs that have a fan base and a fandom. At what point will it get to where you switch that around and you ask the fandom to come to you and tell you which IPs you should be looking at?
Well, very early. I'll tell you right now. I mean, we're a brand new company. We just launched, I think it was less than a month ago. Yeah, about 3 weeks ago. And so, this is truly kind of ground floor for us. But we already are being completely inundated with people that are coming to us with ideas. Hey, have you guys considered looking at this? Oh, I'm a huge fan of that. And so we're in the process right now of building the mechanisms that allow us to, kind of channel and harness that feedback. Because we are, at our core, we're a fan-owned company. And so, as an owner, those fans have a voice, and we want to hear what you guys want us to do. We want to use the power of this legion of fans to help us discover up-and-coming creators. We've got fantastic people like Seth Green and Stupid Buddy Studios and proven content creators that know how to make hit content and know how to monetize it. We'd like to use those resources to help mentor and develop new creators. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for that. And the other thing that I'll mention is that Paul and I are technologists. Actually, one of the former companies that we formed about 13 years ago was a company called Moby TV, and we were the first people in the world to launch live television on your cell phone back in 2003. Back then, we won an Emmy Award for that, for innovation in television. And I think that when you look at now, there are so many amazing opportunities. We're like in this golden age of content development, and the ability to, like what Phil's talking about, to with esports, these new frontiers of virtual reality and augmented reality, interactive television. There's so many great opportunities out there to think differently about content and to expand it into new mediums and find new ways to monetize it. And that's a really core part of our proposition as well, is at the end of the day, we're working with these high-profile Hollywood creators, but we're very opportunistic and very open-minded at how we're looking to distribute that content around the world.
Interesting. Well, I'm curious to understand what you think is going to be that significant change that needs to occur that's going to allow for a shift in the way that you or your industry operates. And I'm going to throw this one first of all at you, Phil, in terms of what you think is going to need to happen in the next 5 or 10 years that's really going to change the way that you do business.
Well, looking at the wider gaming landscape, one of the big challenges I see is the saturation of the market. Like this, the access to tools to produce games, and I think over time produce these broader gaming experiences. We're one of the few companies who can do the sort of games we do today, but in a decade's time, that might be very different. And the saturation of really high quality entertainment in the digital space is just going to continue at a pace. So with that in mind, I think discovery is a massive challenge that, it's not great now. Even in like the app stores and some storefronts, it's, they're either very curated or they're very dependent on the amount of marketing dollars people have got to spend, which in some ways is fine. Those work as kind of marketplaces for investors. But I think when you're looking at independent creators and people with niche products, it's very hard for them to connect with the right people, especially if they don't come in with a huge amount of money. They've got passion projects. Now, some people have stepped in the right direction. I think Steam's gaming sales platform, community platform, has a really good recommendation engine. I think that's moving in the right place. But being able to connect the vast amount of interests that different potential players or consumers have with an increasing number of entertainment offerings is someone needs to crack that in a way that kind of maximizes the satisfaction of both sides. I think there's a real market inefficiency when you're looking at especially the fringes of the digital entertainment marketplace. So I really want someone to have a run at that.
Okay, so that's a call coming out from Phil at Jagex. Jeff, what about you? What do you think is going to need to be this significant change that's going to have to occur for your industry in the next 5 to 10 years?
I hope this is a valid response to your question, but it's actually just happening right now. I mean, for us, these new securities laws, right? The ability for the general public, for regular everyday fans to invest in early stage ventures. And in Legion M's case, in these entertainment properties that they love is really groundbreaking here in the United States. This is reversing securities laws that have been on the books for the last 80 years. And so the second to last change went into effect 6 months ago. The very last part of that new law will take effect in about 5 weeks from now. And, to us, that's really the groundbreaking change. It's kind of funny. Most people will come to us. They're like, why hasn't anybody ever done this before? Like, what's the problem? And in our case, it's because you couldn't. Like, this was illegal 6 months ago. And now, for the first time in history, we can do it. So, like I said, it may not be the answer you were looking for, but for us, we just see, the change has happened, and we're pouncing on that and really ready to pioneer this new frontier.
It's a very exciting time for your industry. And it's actually very interesting to note that it is the change in law or the change in policy that is driving your industry forward or driving your opportunity forward. And we've seen that exact same thing happen with the VR industry, in as much as, we saw a whole array of different patents expire. And then as a result of that, we've just seen this huge shift forward in the entire industry of VR. So I think that there's a lot of value in the shift in the laws and the shift in the stance on certain things. So very exciting times for your industry. But Brian, now I know that you will have something very interesting to say, which is why I've saved you to last. But what would you say is the shift that you think needs to occur in the next 5 to 10 years for your industry?
I've been sitting here pondering that because I couldn't agree more than I do with Phil in terms of the shift that's happening, the problems that are being faced by the game sector, because it's absolutely true. Obscurity is the problem rather than piracy right now. There is so much content out there. There are so many games and so many different devices now that, just finding that audience can be the biggest problem. But for me, the biggest opportunity is for all of the different sectors, film, games, television, music, literature, performing arts, to stop thinking about themselves in such a compartmentalized and insular way and start looking at how we start to break down the barriers. So it's not just you've got games here, film here. It's how do we start to work together far more cleverly and do things that really start to transform the industries themselves. So I'm absolutely convinced that there is a project out there between a game developer and a band or a musician or an artist where the result is going to be a cross between a game or an app or an album, or it's going to be something different, and it's not going to require the music companies, it's not going to require the games companies or the publishers. It's the really, really fascinating point where we start to become confident enough in our own sectors to actually reach out to all of the others and go, guys, come and talk to us, because together we can do some phenomenal things.
You've been reading our manifesto, Brian.
I looked at the pictures, certainly.
Oh, wonderful. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate you joining us today on this Digital Jam session. But as always, we like to leave our listeners with a way to be able to find out a little bit more about you and what you're up to. And we ask you to do that by giving us your social media handle of choice. And I'll start with you, Phil.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter with a handle of Proxy, which is spelled Proxii.
Wonderful, thank you. And Brian?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm Flackboy, FLACKBOY.
And should we be putting a shout out to Team Rock as well?
At Team Rock Games, you'll find us there. There's some fantastic things going on, which oddly enough are bringing together games and music in entirely new ways. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought that would happen? And Jeff, what about you? What would be your social media handle of choice?
Well, the best thing to do if you're interested in more is thelegionm.com is our website where we're accepting reservations today.
Wonderful, thank you. And Paul did have to leave us quite early. However, he has asked me to share with you the Twitter handle, which is @LegionMOfficial. So please do check it out. But once again, we thank you for listening to this Digital Jam session. I have been Tanya, your host and the founder of Digital Jam. And if you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and join us on Twitter @DigitalJamLTD.
digitaljamsessions.com